Hi everyone, and welcome to the recap of round number 6, the game I played yesterday in the Arona Open against the strong Indian international master Dhulipalla. So again, it was a French defense, as we saw in the recap of round number 4, but this time the game was not as smooth as the last one. So it was extremely complicated, and at some point I was very worried that the game could go sideways as well. And I think it was super interesting, and I think there's a lot to learn for everyone involved here. So it was e4 e6, and my opponent went for the Tarrasch defense, a little bit unexpected. He's usually a d4 player, so I was already kind of surprised by him going e4, but I still had something in mind here. So we are following one of the main lines here. In the Tarrasch, obviously the other line is here for white to take and then go knight f3, and then here we have a huge line. Black can go to d6, d7, or d8, all possible moves here. But he went knight f3, cd4, and again he could transpose to the line we just saw by taking on d5. But I would be fine with this. He went for knight d4 instead, and here I went for knight c6. I was also thinking to go knight f6 here, which is another decent line, and after ed5, knight d5, we get kind of, again, like a theoretical position, but black should be more or less okay here. I think the only important thing to know is here to give this check, because c3 is not working due to knight takes c3, and black is also more or less fine here, but it is a very solid line for white, and I wanted to create more chances. That's why I played knight c6. And my opponent played bishop b5, which is the main move. What is important to understand here is that the point of bishop b5, if black goes bishop d7, which is the main move, then white wants to take and then go back with the bishop to d3. And white always argues in these structures that the bishop on d7 is worse than on c8. Let's say he takes first on c6 and goes the same. Now I could go knight f6, and after e5, I always have this square for my knight on d7. And I also have the plan to go a5, bishop a6 to exchange these bishops. So that's the reason behind white's bishop b5 here. But I went for knight e7, which is still quite an interesting sideline. It hasn't been played in many games. And my point is simply that I don't want to put this bishop on d7 because then white would get what we just saw, which is this position. And after knight e7, if he would take, then obviously my bishop is still on c8, and something like this, I thought in the game I could just go knight g6, and I'm totally fine here. My opponent castled bishop d7. I still kind of remembered this. I prepared it some time ago, and here he went knight b3, which was a new move for me. I only recalled knight f3 being the best move according to the engine, and after a6, this bit strange looking move bishop a4, I think most humans would go to d3, but there black is fine. I think queen c7 followed by rook d8, and it's a normal game. But bishop a4 is the best, and here in the game I remember this knight b1 idea, which is best according to the engine, but here black is also fine. I think I intended to play knight g6 and to sacrifice this pawn when black gets pretty good compensation, just lead in development and active piece placement. Queen a5 is also possible, and to go for this symmetrical position. So I was ready here, but he went knight b3, and I went into my first long think. a6 I played. After some consideration, I thought this bishop has to go anyway, has to go back anyway. With knight b3, I was always worried about these knight c5 ideas, so that was his main point by playing knight b3, and then often he gets the bishop pair, and as we will see in the game, that's what I really try to avoid, but I shouldn't have been so scared about this plan. So a6 was logical, kicking the bishop back, and now I played knight e5. I also thought about queen c7, which turns out to be the best move, but I didn't like this knight c5, but the computer just says that I can give the bishop, and now when you look at it, it kind of makes sense. Black's pieces are placed pretty well, and now I can simply develop with this fianchetto on the king side. And white has kind of troubles to bring out his pieces in time, so this might have been better. but knight e5 was fine too. He went bishop e2. According to the computer, what would be better is ed5, and now the point is after knight d5, he has this more active square on e4 for the bishop. I intended to play knight takes d3, and simply to sacrifice this pawn. Go knight f5, and also here black has great compensation for the pawn. I will follow up with bishop e7, short castle. I have this very strong light squared bishop, and yeah, black has at least enough compensation here. But he went bishop e2, queen c7, that was my idea. Now knight c5 is not possible anymore. He went c3. I thought a lot in the game about these structures which can arise after f4. I thought about both moves here, knight c6 and knight g6, but there are some ideas which I want to show. For example, knight c6 would have been my go-to choice, and after e5 there's this very typical idea of breaking the center with g5, and black would already be better here, simply undermining the pawn structure, and I will probably, let's say he takes here, I will always win back this pawn. I can castle long later, and black is doing very well. Knight g6 would also be possible. As I said, I calculated both moves, and here in this line bishop c5 check would be strong. I think I mostly considered bishop b5 right away, simply exchanging my bad bishop for his good bishop, but this can run into some g4 right away. So bishop c5, the computer suggestion, is even stronger, and if he takes, simply h5, and now I have two ideas. The first quite simple idea is to stop white from playing g4 himself, and I also often have the idea, let's say white does nothing, I go h4, and now I have this nice trick with knight g3, and white is mated, so quite a nice tactic. So h5 is strong, and if white somehow doesn't let this plan with h4 knight g3 happen, then I can simply go bishop e5 anyway and exchange these bishops without g4 being in the picture. He went c3 instead, and now I thought a bit too long here, and I saw all of the good moves, but I didn't go for the best continuation. So what I understood here was that the first one who takes the pawn kind of makes a concession, and that's what I did. I made a concession by taking here, because now white can develop his knight with the tempo, and his piece is now more active. If white would take, for example, here, then I'm the first one to recapture, and I gain the time. After c3, what would be better? Long castle would be very strong, which I totally missed during the game, actually. But it's quite logical. It's often a plan in these structures, and in most cases I will just continue attacking on the king side somehow. For example, after queen c2, h5 would be strong. I also checked the engine also gives f5, which during the game never even crossed my mind. g5 is also one idea, simply stopping f4 and preparing bishop g7. And black is doing pretty well in all of these positions. Again, f4 knight c6, and if e5 g5, black would be already much better. Another move which I saw in the game but for some reason didn't play was bishop a4. Maybe just looked too strange for me, but I'm just pinning this knight, and it's quite tough for white to develop, actually. I think during the game I didn't see how to continue after queen e1, but simply knight g6, hinting at knight f4. And my piece constellation is quite strange indeed, but so is white's, and I guess I can still have I still have this plan with long castle, and or sooner or later really take on e4, and this would be a much better version than what I had in the game. I took immediately, went knight d5, and here my opponent misstepped with bishop g5, but again I didn't fully make use of this small mistake. Queen d4 would be better. I saw this during the game, but after knight c6 I thought it should be equal, which is the case. Queen d3 and something like bishop e7, and I still have the choice if I can castle long or castle short. Both should be possible in general. He went bishop g5, and now I went knight g6. I should have just gone h6. I was afraid of the bishop coming to g3 and then this pin here, but I simply can play g5, bishop g3 and long castle, and there's no real way to make use for white of this pin, and after something like queen d4, for example, I always have knight f4, breaking the pin, and in most cases I will win the bishop pair. Now already bishop c6 is there, so with this I could have gotten great chances to have a good position. I went knight g6 to prevent this plan from white of the bishop going back to g3. But now after rook e1, h6, he simply went back with the bishop, and now he always has these ideas with c4. And I was already feeling a little bit uncomfortable here. c4, knight f6. Knight f4 seems active, but at least during the game I thought he can simply go bishop f1 and then g3, and I didn't really see where the knight will go then. So I went back, he took, and here I only thought about for him going queen c2 and then bishop c3, and I thought it should be equal, but that there are still quite some unbalances with this pawn structure. But then he quite shocked me with this move bishop a5. So he's kind of forcing me to react somehow. I could move my queen, but that's not really what I want, because now the bishop is very strong. I can never put my rook to d8 again. So I basically had to play b6. At least that's what I thought. And now he went bishop b4. So he's stopping me from castling short now. And he provoked this b6. So very often he has ideas to open the files with c5. And here I was already quite worried, even though there's actually not much reason to, at least objectively. And I went bishop e5, which is kind of strange. My first idea was to go bishop e7, which turns out to be the best move. But during the game, I didn't like this move c5 here. So now I cannot castle, because then after cb6, I cannot take back because the bishop in d7 is hanging, simply losing a piece. And after bc5, I thought rook c1, and after castle, I calculated bishop c6, and I simply thought he could take, and he won a pawn, but I can go queen b7 and takes, and I missed that the pawn on b2 is also hanging. So, for example, knight c5, queen b2. I could already be better because the pawn on a2 is quite weak. So bishop e7 would have been much safer. Obviously, white could go something like takes, and then something like rook c1 and c5, and white's position is very safe after all, or bishop c3 castle. But it would have been definitely a wiser choice than what I played. I played bishop e5, and my idea was to stop white from going bishop d6 and then go a5, pushing the bishop back to a3, where it's not always standing so well. But bishop e5, the problem is that I'm still not solving the problem with my king. I can still not castle short, and during the game that brought me a lot of headaches. So he went g3. The computer says that bishop f3 is better. Honestly, during the game, I didn't really think about this much. I thought I could take and go rook d8, but the engine says c5, and it's already quite bad for black here. So bishop f3 would have been better, at least objectively. He played g3, which I think is by far the most logical move. And now I went a5, bishop a3, and here again I thought quite long, and at first I thought I was simply losing a few moves, because I simply did not see how to solve the problem of my king here. But the computer comes up with quite a few solutions actually. He likes rook d8, getting ready to have this discovery with the bishop on the queen on d1. During the game I didn't like bishop h5, knight e7 and c5, but again the computer is not impressed. He simply goes b5, c6, and apparently this is fine for black because I have b4 in time. I think after c6 I already kind of stopped calculating, because white's bishops just seem so powerful, and I thought I'm not in time here to consolidate. But we reach an endgame by force, and here I'm definitely not worse, maybe even slightly better. But here I went for long castle, and it was kind of out of desperation because I didn't really like rook d8. And it's not a good move, but practically speaking, it was quite an interesting choice, I would say. Because now I also at least kind of solved the problem with my king. King on c8 is not always that safe, but at least it's safer on e8, because on e8 there's always these bishop h5 ideas, and then sometimes rook takes c6 is an idea. Let's say bishop c6, bishop h5. and if the bishop moves, there's always this, lots of troubles here on the square on e6. So that's what I tried to do with long castle, and he went bishop h5, which is not the best continuation. c5 would have been best, and here some completely crazy variations are happening. So b5 is forced. I cannot. I have to try to keep the lines closed. b5, and again, white has to play c6, trying to open these files. Now during the game, I intended to play bishop takes c6, and my opponent only calculated queen c1, which he told me. But then I'm fine. After b4, knight a5, b takes a3. Now after knight c6, a b2, and I'm hitting the queen with a tempo. And after bishop a6, king d7, knight e5. I can even take back with the queen because the queen on c1 is still hanging, and I would be winning here. But queen c2 is much stronger. And now in the same variation after b4, now first of all, white has rook d1 because the queen is not on c1, and now black is simply lost. I'm just getting mated. After queen c2, I could try bishop d5, and still everything is pretty unclear. Queen b1 was the best move, which I checked, and after b4, rook c1, this line here, white had to find this insane move, queen e1 here, and it ends with some madness where apparently white is probably winning, but yeah, I think no one could find all of this in the game. I reached this position in my analysis, and my king is very weak, so white could probably slowly make progress, something like h4 at some point, push the a pawn, and at least practically it seems winning for white. I could also try after c6 to go bishop e8, simply again trying to keep the lines closed, but I simply don't have any defenders with my king, and after queen c2, b4, bishop a6. I am winning a piece here sooner or later, but the computer said bishop e2 is very strong for some reason and gives a big advantage for white. Again, in a game, it's probably totally unclear, but with my king being so exposed, it's at least very dangerous for me. So he should have gone c5 here, definitely. He went for bishop h5, trying to make use of my pieces coordination here. Everything is kind of loose, the bishop on e5, knight on g6. But I think what he missed is that after bishop c6, what I played, queen e2, bishop f6, I can simply go back with the bishop, and he can never really take here on g6 because I simply go king d7, and now my king is really super safe. After c5, I always have b5, and his bishop is getting trapped. And I also have this monster bishop here on c6, and here I would already be winning. Rook e8 is coming, and now his king is even weaker than mine on b7. That's why he played rook d1, and here I took everything and went rook d8. I was afraid of his plan to maybe go c5 anyway, now with rook d1, and after, let's say, king b7, c5, b5, rook d6. So I wanted to avoid these type of things. That's why I exchanged all of the rooks. I took and went rook d8. The computer suggests queen e5, which is probably better. I mean, I realized during the game that I have to exchange the major pieces because endgames are most likely always good for me because his pieces are quite awkward here, especially the bishop on a3 is pretty much out of the game. And after queen e5, he doesn't have anything better than to exchange queens. And after knight d4, bishop e8, I think black is at least slightly better. It's probably not much, but again, white has some problems with his piece coordination. Queen g4 is something which would also make sense to not exchange queens, but after queen g5, again, he has to exchange because of queen e2, knight f4, and I would simply win the piece on h5, or even more with knight h3 to come as well. So queen e5, maybe a better try. Instead, I exchanged the rooks, rook d8, takes, and he went bishop f3. Again, if he would take on g6, my compensation wouldn't be as great, but still, after king b7, now I'm threatening mate on d1. And after queen e2, something like g5, during the game I thought it would be a fantastic compensation because, again, his pieces are out of the game. My bishop on c6 and also my bishop on f6. My bishop pair is simply extremely strong, and at some point I might be able to develop some mating threats along this diagonal here. That's why he went bishop f3, exchanging this good bishop on c6, and after takes, now I went for knight e5. Here I already realized that it will probably end in some sort of perpetual check, because my king here is a kind of weak, but I also have some perpetual ideas on white's king. For example, if I would go king b8, stopping queen a8 check, after queen c6, queen d1, here I have this idea with knight f4 check, very typical perpetual idea, and here there's not much more than a draw. I went knight e5 instead, and after queen a8 check, I went king d7. At first, my idea was to play king c7, but here I realized that it's just a draw after king c6. Something like queen a6, it's not the only way. Also c5 will end in the same. I have to give perpetual here, otherwise white would have some nasty threats with knight takes a5. That's why I went king d7, trying to create something, still playing for a win here. But he played queen a6, which I totally missed. I only thought about queen e4 here. And here I believe my idea was to play, what was it? I think king c7 was my idea. And now queen d3 is already a threat. And again, if I manage to exchange queens, I'm probably even winning here. And if c5, I think I checked queen d1 check, king g2, queen d5. Again, exchanging queens. And here probably it's a draw, but I have some ideas like knight c4, and at least during the game I thought this could be dangerous for him. But he went queen a6, and here again I was already a bit worried because queen b5 check could come, then c5, and all of a sudden my whole position could collapse. But then I found knight f3 check and king g2, knight d4, and here most pieces will exchange. The computer suggested still to play king e8, which could be another try, but again it all looks like perpetual check would happen. Right now I'm not sure what happened after queen b5 check. I guess queen d7, and after queen b6. At least I have these perpetual checks ideas still, but I don't see if I would have anything more. The computer gave queen b7 here and something like h5, simply improving the king side, and he gave the typical evaluation of 0.00, so it didn't really matter here. I went for the more forcing way with knight f3 check, king g2, knight d4, and again I'm trying to exchange as many pieces as possible, simply that my king is not so weak here. He went c5. If he would take, again, I would be quite safe here. Yeah, there's not much to do with queen b5. I could simply go to c7, for example. And after c5, I always have this check at least, and gaining this pawn here. He went c5, knight takes b3, queen b5 check, king c8. And here he could have already went for this draw. Here I didn't have anything better. But he went a takes b3, and now king c6. Not the only move. The computer also gave b takes c5, which should be a draw. His two attackers are simply not enough to mate me, and my queen is a pretty good defender here. I went king c6, takes, and here we settled for a draw with this move repetition here. I could and maybe should have tried king d7 because there's still some sort of play left here. For example, if he would go for this check, then we could come into this endgame where, again, it's probably a draw still, but here white already has to be quite careful because he has these double pawns here. The pawn on b2 is always a weakness, so the bishop on a3 is kind of locked in here. And I could slowly try to improve my pawns, for example, king f3, bishop d4, and then slowly come with everything. And I do have some winning chances here. But obviously he doesn't have to go for this. So after king d7, for example, queen d3 check, king c8, and as long as he keeps the queens on the board, he will always have perpetual ideas. For example, simply going king g1 or something like this, renewing the threat of queen a6, and it should already should also be a draw. So yeah, this game super interesting, I think. I'm only a bit upset that I didn't really fully understand this long castle plan, because it would be would be quite strong. For example, here long castle, or in general, simply playing on the king side would have been the go-to. I think even some h5 ideas, maybe not here, were pretty strong. So I think this would have given me good chances, but instead I went for this, which wasn't the best way. And again, after bishop g5, I had this chance to play for an edge here, but didn't fully make use of it. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this recap. I really do. I love to talk about those games afterwards. And yeah, next round I'm playing against the international master Narva Mai, very strong player from Estonia. And yeah, I hope to see you in the following recaps. And until then, all the best to you, and see you soon.